He paid $180 for a thorn-covered farm. Her goats found a hidden stone well. The gavel came down at exactly 9:47 in the morning, and 30 acres of land nobody wanted belonged to a woman nobody expected to raise her hand. The Boone County Courthouse steps were crowded that day, mostly with men in canvas jackets looking for cheap timber ground or a tax lot they could flip by spring. Nobody was looking for what Colleen Whitfield was looking for. She was 38 years old, a widow going on 14 months, and the only bid she placed all morning was on parcel 114, 30 acres on Kettle Hollow Road, that hadn't been walked by a living soul in over a decade. "You just bought yourself 30 acres of thorns," a man behind her laughed, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. Colleen didn't turn around. She reached into her coat, pulled out a worn leather journal with a cracked strap, and wrote one line before closing it again. October 14th. Bought the Kettle place. $180. Nobody else wanted it. That's exactly why I do. Nobody understood why she wanted that land. 6 months later, nobody could believe what her goats uncovered. If you've ever looked at something broken and seen what it could become, stay with this one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because this is the kind of story we tell every week on Farmland Files. The Kettle Hollow property had been in a legal limbo since the 1990s, tied up in a family dispute between 3 siblings who never spoke to each other again after their father passed. No one had cleared a path, run a fence line, or even walked the property boundary in years. There was no real road in, just a washed-out logging track that ended in a wall of multiflora rose and blackberry briar, taller than a man. Cedar saplings had claimed what was once open pasture. Poison ivy climbed the old fence posts like it owned them. It was, by every practical measure, worthless ground. Colleen didn't see it that way. She'd grown up 2 hollows over, in a house with a mother who canned tomatoes and a father who could fix anything with baling wire and patience. After her husband Daniel died in a highway accident, she'd sold their small suburban home outside Bowling Green and moved back to Kentucky Hill Country with almost nothing left but grief, a pickup truck, and a need to build something with her hands again. She didn't buy the land because she saw dollar signs. She bought it because everyone else had already decided it was finished, and she wasn't ready to believe that about anything, not the land, and not herself. Word travels fast in small counties, and within a week, an old man named Harlan Pretty showed up at her gate. Harlan had spent 31 years as a soil conservationist before retiring, and he had a reputation for being more interested in listening to land than talking about it. He didn't offer her advice. He never did. "What grows where the water stays?" he asked her, standing at the edge of the briar wall. Colleen frowned. "I don't know yet." "Good," Harlan said. "Then you're paying attention." He came back every few weeks that fall, always with a new question instead of an answer. What survives when everything else dies? What does the land remember, if you're willing to ask it? Colleen wrote every question in her journal, underlined twice, because she'd learned that Harlan's questions usually answered themselves months later, just not in words. Clearing 30 acres of briar by hand would have taken years, and money she didn't have. So Colleen did what generations of hill farmers before her had done. She brought in goats. She started with 11 Kiko Cross does, hardy, browsing animals bred for exactly this kind of punishing terrain. She built temporary paddocks using portable electric netting, moving the herd in tight rotational grazing patterns so they'd hit the multiflora rose and blackberry hard before moving to fresh ground. Goats browse instead of graze. They go for woody stems and broadleaf plants before touching grass, which made them the only realistic tool for reclaiming land this far gone. 3 goats quickly became characters in their own right. There was Ruth, a stubborn old doe who led the herd everywhere, first through every gate and first into every unfamiliar paddock. There was Biscuit, a young buckling who treated every fence as a personal challenge and escaped no fewer than 6 times that first season. And then there was Marigold, smaller, quieter, endlessly curious, always wandering toward the one corner of the property nobody else paid attention to. The failures piled up fast. Fencing shorted out during a September storm, and half the herd wandered loose for 2 days. Colleen found Biscuit tangled in wild grapevine, bleeding from a briar gash that needed stitches from the vet. A dry spell in late summer cracked the ground and stressed the pasture before it had even started to recover. Twice, she heard coyotes at night close enough to keep her awake, with a flashlight and an old shotgun she hoped she'd never need. Every setback went into the journal, in her small, steady handwriting, not as complaints, as data. August 3rd. Lost 2 paddocks of fence to the storm. Rebuilding smarter this time. Moving posts to higher ground. September 19th. Biscuit escaped again. He's not being bad. He's testing where the boundary actually is. Maybe I am too. By early spring, the goats had stripped back enough growth that Colleen could finally walk sections of the property she hadn't seen since the day she bought it. And that's when the land started talking. First, it was a low stone ridge running along the base of a hillside, too straight, too deliberate to be natural. Then, weeks later, a series of flat terraces cut into a slope, the kind old-timers used to slow erosion and hold soil for planting. Then the collapsed remains of what looked like an old orchard, gnarled apple trees gone wild among the cedars. But Marigold kept returning to one particular spot, a low depression near the base of the hollow, digging at the ground with her hoof and refusing to move on with the rest of the herd. 3 times Colleen pulled her away. The 4th time, she knelt down instead. Beneath a mat of vines and decades of leaf litter, her hands found stone. Not scattered stone, fitted stone, laid by hand, curved in a perfect circle. It took 2 full weekends of careful digging to expose what was underneath. A 19th century stone-lined spring well, built with the kind of dry stack craftsmanship that took real skill and real time. When she finally cleared enough debris to look down into it, she saw water. Cold, clear, still moving, quietly, after more than 100 years of being forgotten. She sat back on the wet ground and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she opened her journal and wrote, April 2nd. Found the well today. It was never lost. It was just waiting. A visit to the County Historical Society, and a patient afternoon with an old land surveyor named Ruth Callahan, no relation to the goat, Colleen liked to joke, confirmed what Harlan had suspected all along. The property had once belonged to one of the earliest homestead families in the hollow, and the well had supplied water not just to that farm, but to neighboring families and travelers moving cattle through the region before the modern road existed. This wasn't a treasure story. There was no gold, no hidden fortune, no dramatic twist. It was something quieter and, in its own way, more valuable. A genuine piece of agricultural history, still functional, still giving water after all these years. Word of the discovery spread, and it wasn't long before a regional development group came calling, interested in the property's road frontage and the reliable water source for a planned rural subdivision. Their first offer was modest. Their second offer, 3 weeks later, was not. Colleen said no both times. I didn't buy 30 acres of thorns to sell 30 acres of water, she told them, and closed the door. With a dependable water source finally restored, everything changed. The rotational grazing system Colleen had been building on faith finally had the reliability it needed. Pasture recovered faster than she dared hope. Deer and wild turkey returned to fields that had been choked in briar for a decade. Neighbors who'd written off their own overgrown ground started asking her how she'd done it. By the following spring, Colleen was hosting small workshops on brush clearing and rotational grazing right there on the Kettle Hollow property. A local elementary school brought 2 classes out to see the well and meet the goats. The farm that once sold for $180 became something the whole hollow pointed to with pride, not pity. These days, Colleen still carries that same leather journal. Its cover softer now, its pages full. Ruth still leads the herd every morning. Biscuit still tests every fence he meets. And Marigold still wanders back to that same corner of the pasture, just to stand near the well, like she knows exactly what she found there. The well had never been lost. It had simply been waiting for someone patient enough to uncover it. Sometimes the greatest thing buried beneath neglected land isn't treasure. Sometimes, it's the future that everyone else stopped looking for. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. We tell one of these every week here on Farmland Files. And we'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? And have you ever found value in something everyone else had already given up on? Tell us in the comments. We read every one.